Welcome to Eyes Wide Open, a podcast aiming a curious eye at what's new in eye care. This podcast is a service provided by Canadian Eye Care Business Review. Please visit their website at eyecarebusinessreview.ca to stay up to date with the latest eye care news and lots of great resources and articles. I'm your host, Glen Chiasson. I'm an optometrist practicing in Toronto, Ontario, and I love to learn new things, and we're going to use this trait to investigate what's new in eye care in the vast array of areas that eye care providers are lucky enough to work in every day that we're in our offices. So let's take a look. Today I'm going to be speaking with Jackie Joachim. She is the Chief Operating Officer for ROI Corporation. ROI specializes in assisting healthcare professionals in the optometry, dental, and veterinary professions appraise and sell or transition their practices, and they have a team of representatives across Canada. Jackie has an optimistic view of optometric practice values moving forward, and we'll be discussing ways that ROI can help both practice vendors and prospective buyers. Okay, so I'm here with Jackie Joachim from ROI. Good morning, Jackie.
Good morning, Glenn.
Let's jump in here. So we'll start off first, maybe give me a bit of background on ROI as a company, as an entity, and we'll start there.
Sure, I would love to. So ROI Corporation, we've been actually in business for 46 years. The founder, Roy Brown, was actually a dental supply guy who had a lot of dentists that at that point in time were thinking their only option for retirement was to simply lock the doors and go. And he assured them that there was value in the equipment. So as a result, he saw an opportunity and a need in the market, and that's how he started the business. So what Roy does is we appraise and sell. Our roots are in dental, but in the last 10 years, we started working with veterinarians and optometrists because ultimately healthcare businesses have similar needs, challenges. The goodwill is always extremely important. So when we appraise and sell these offices, the results are very similar. And, you know, we love what we do. We think that it's very important that an owner know the value of their practice, and our company mantra has always been allowing an owner to exit profitably and with dignity.
Awesome. People that know me know that I'm relatively pessimistic overall. So convince me otherwise. So what does the market currently look like for optometric practices and reselling?
So Glenn, this is going to be interesting because anyone who knows me knows I'm an uber optimist.
Oh, we should get along great then.
Exactly. I actually do feel that the optometrists have tremendous opportunities in the market, and especially in the next few years. And the reason I say that is I'm going to start with just a quick example of the dental market. If you look at a dental office located in a particular plaza, and right beside it is an optometry office, let's say for argument's sake that both offices have similar revenues. Let's say that both owners net about 40% after everything's said and done. My question is, why does that dental office sell for more money than the optometry office does? And what I've been seeing, because I've been in this space for 25 years, is that optometrists today are where the dentists were about 15 years ago. And what I mean by that is most appraisals that we do right now are for owners that have an associate or have somebody that they know really well that wants to buy in. So they do what's called a private deal or a private arrangement. And while that seems, a little bit less scary, a little bit easier, less painless, more times than not, that owner is actually really not getting the best possible price for their office. So what makes a dental office sell more than an optometry office is just simply that dentists have now been trained when they're ready to sell, more often than not, to take that practice to what's called the open market. And by having multiple people express an interest, the chances of getting a better price closer to the value of what that practice is worth is greater for a dentist than it is an optometrist. And why I say the optometrists have a huge opportunity is because now what we're seeing, we've been beating this drum now for a few years and trying to educate optometrists to say, get an appraisal, allow somebody to represent you in this sale, because it is such an important asset that you've spent years and years and years working on, preparing for. So why not, as you're looking to sell it, get the best possible scenario for yourself? And now we're finding that optometrists are more responsive to that. And as more get on board, the values of clinics will also, just from economics, continue to rise, because then the more buyers, the more people trying to buy will help that increase.
Right. So essentially not a bidding war, but similar, right? You want more people interested in your practice.
Well, let's look at it this way. If you have a house and you're going to sell your house for whatever reason, would you be willing to sell it to just one buyer?
Right.
Right? You don't. You want to have a market is not one buyer. I think what scares people about the idea of going to the market is the fear of multiple people will know, my staff will find out, everyone will know what my numbers look like. And it's very exposing. But if you're working with the right person, it should not be, it would not be like that. It would be very controlled, very private. And once you get through that experience, the owner will look back and say, this was the right thing for me to do.
Right on. And so does that mindset then sort of explain why, on average, an optometry practice currently would sell for less than a dental practice?
It does, because I think also, unfortunately, optometrists don't really understand the value of their practices. And what I mean by that is I get the privilege of talking to a lot of optometrists, and I just listen to what they think their practices are worth and what they think is great. And I think as Canadians, we're just by default, we want to say, well, I should be billing this, or I should be netting that. And rather than looking at the success that we currently have, we're so humble that we don't always want to acknowledge that we actually have a really good thing going and we deserve to be paid for that good thing.
Awesome. One thing I sort of looked into as I was researching for this discussion is that whole mindset. And I didn't realize there was such a big difference between the dental practice resale market versus the optometric. And I mean, optometrists, as a rule, we like to make fun of dentists anyway.
I think we all like to make fun of dentists.
An eye exam is better than going to the dentist. But certainly it sounds like they have a model in place, as you said, just from having a decade of head start.
Well, for sure. And it's interesting. I would actually say the vets are a little bit further ahead than the optometrists now.
We have a new target.
You have a new target. Absolutely. Because they've now started to accept the idea that, yeah, my practice is valuable and I shouldn't just go with the first person who expresses an interest. And I always tell people, it doesn't matter whether you're a vet, dentist, or optometrist, if somebody comes and knocks on your door and offers you whatever to buy your office, even though that might sound good and attractive, you really should think about it, only because if someone comes to you privately, that means there's others out there that would be equally interested, which again could positively influence the final outcome.
Right. So let's say I've been in practice for 10 years. Mm-hmm. I've been in practice for a long time, but let's, as an example, what benefit is there then maybe to having an appraisal, even if you're not currently getting ready to sell?
So there's various types of appraisals. We have the full comprehensive appraisal, which is really a document that is meant for when you're looking to sell. We have modified ones. We also have letters of opinion. So if you're at that 10-year mark and you just want to take the pulse, a letter of opinion is completely fine. But what I would like to offer your audience is I'm happy if they want to reach out to me, I will give them a very high level complimentary value.
Awesome.
So at least it makes them think about it. I actually don't think it's a bad thing, even if it is your 10-year mark, to do a full appraisal, because it's the best time to think of selling is at least 3 to 5 years down the road, because any changes that you need to make, any suggestions that we give you as a result of the appraisal, you have more than enough time to implement them.
Right.
And also part of the reason that I always encourage people to get a full appraisal at some point is it's a financial planning tool. It's something that you can use that, God forbid, something happens to you and an unexpected diagnosis or an unexpected death. I mean, nobody likes to think about that, but things happen to business owners. And the last thing you want your family to have to be struggling with is what to do with your practice. And we have been in many of those cases, unfortunately. But when there is at least an appraisal on hand, it could be used for insurance purposes. It could be used for if somebody had to get into action very quickly and deal with the practice in a very unforeseen circumstance. Because again, as you know, the goodwill is what is really important in the practice. Yes, obviously the equipment, the assets, the physical location, because you can't, without any of those, you can't see patients. But at the end of the day, it's those patients that are truly the most valuable asset in the practice overall.
We sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of, I guess, exposing yourself. I don't know if that's the right word to the open market. Mm-hmm. But in your opinion, what's involved in doing that, and why would a broker be helpful with that?
So if you're at that point, I would suggest you interview brokers. And the reason I say that is a lot of people will tell you that they can sell your practice, but not everyone can. And some of them will actually make your worst nightmares come true by exposing your office, by giving away information they shouldn't, and not even handling the questions that buyers put forth properly. So with all due respect, if it's okay, I'd like to just tell you how we would do it. And then again, for your audience, they can use that as a benchmark. Whether they deal with us or not, at least they know what they should be expecting from anyone that they're speaking to on this topic.
Yeah, I mean, for a lot of us, it's going to be, potentially a 1 or maybe 2 time exercise. Certainly good to know what the steps are in the process.
For sure. So once we've done the appraisal, then we start during that process or right after it, that's when we start talking about someone who's ready to sell. So the first thing that we do is we treat it very confidentially, highly confidential. So even in terms of delivering the appraisal to you, we will not deliver it to the office unless you tell us otherwise. When we're gathering the information to do the appraisal, we come in after hours because staff, we don't want them to get upset. We don't want them to start questioning and wondering what's happening. And then will that motivate them to maybe look for another job, which again has all an impact on how you run your office and the ultimate goodwill. So everything is done in the strictest of confidence. When we actually take a practice to market, we have what's called the new listing service. And again, I do recommend, even whether your audience is ready or not, doesn't matter, they should sign up for it because every time we have a practice come on the market, subscribers get a high level email to let them know something's available. So what you would see is you would see a general area. So let's say the practice was in Toronto, we would call it GTA because GTA is huge. If it was, say, Barrie, we would say York Simcoe, because again, that's a really large area. We would never say Barrie or Scarborough or, anything so specific.
My exact street address.
Yeah, exactly. So we would never there would be enough information in what we call a web ad that would entice a buyer to say, you know what, that sounds pretty good. I'd like more information, but it's not enough that people can figure out, oh, that's Dr. Glen's office. For sure. I'm going after that one. Because the other thing we don't want to have happen is people bypass us and suddenly show up in the office and say, oh, I hear the office is for sale to the front desk. I mean, that's the biggest disaster that can happen.
Right.
So when this web ad goes out, people must respond to us and we take the time to pre-qualify them. We speak to them. We find out what their intentions are. We find out, are they actually even going to be able to qualify for financing? So we get to really know who this buyer is. And besides being important for the obvious, it's also really important because when someone is ready to sell, we want to know, why are you selling? What is it that you're looking to achieve after you sell? Maybe like we have people that sell because they love being the doctor. They just don't want to manage the office anymore. They just want to see patients. They don't want to have to do the admin or the HR or anything like that. So therefore, if we take that kind of a practice to market, any buyer that has an intention of buying and asking the vendor to leave after 3 months, obviously that's not going to be a good fit. And really, fit is the most important thing to us. There's been times where we've gone through the process and we actually say to our vendor, we don't think you should continue on because we don't think what you're expecting is actually going to happen with this particular buyer. So it's not always about just selling and getting paid for our job. It's a legacy thing. We want to make sure that, because we don't just disappear once the sale is done. We're still there for the new owner. We're still there to talk to the vendor because the transition does take time. So that's really important. And all of our buyers sign a confidentiality agreement. We're very, very clear with them that breaching this has serious repercussions. And when we do what's called an open, again, let's say we were selling your office, we would not release the address to the qualified buyers until the night before. So typically an open will happen on a Sunday when the office is closed and we don't have any risk of a staff member being there or a patient dropping in. But before we do the physical open, we would not send out the address until we know the office is closed on that Saturday. So if you're finished at seeing patients at 3, buyers that are qualified for your office, they will not know your address till at least 5 o'clock in the evening.
Right. And that would give me at least 2 hours to tidy up.
Well, we help you get ready for the open. Like we will have talked a lot about the open before we actually get there. So, and listen, I've gone to a practice and shoveled snow with my little brush from the back of my car because the snowplow guy didn't show up. We've mopped floors. Like, we've got some pretty fun stories to share if anyone ever really wanted to know what we've done to get a practice ready for buyers to come through.
So let's say we have someone looking to buy a practice, right? And so obviously they're probably not going to be sitting there with hundreds of thousands of dollars in the bank. How does ROI work with the buyer and the bank?
Excellent question. So the one thing that I want to put out there right away is that we are exclusive, which means we only represent the vendor. And that is intentional because when someone is buying a clinic, they will always come with a relationship with some accountant, a lawyer, perhaps a colleague. So there'll usually be about 3 or 4 people supporting this person versus the buyer. So we only really fight for the buyer. And I say it like that because sometimes if you have another advisor that says, well, I have a client that's looking to buy and I think it would be a good fit for you, who is that person really representing? Right. Because once your transaction and sale is finished, you're done. But the relationship with that buyer will continue on. So that's something really critical to keep in mind. But from a buyer's perspective, we have a duty because we are licensed to provide the buyer with whatever information he or she needs to get this done if this is the right fit. So from a banking perspective, what's really great is that the bankers, BMO, RBC, TD, CIBC, any of those folks, as long as they're healthcare bankers, and I say this because I come from banking and traditional commercial lending never gives somebody 100% financing, and they certainly don't rely on the goodwill because that's an intangible. But when it comes to healthcare, these very specifically trained people understand the nuances of the practices. So they will give a qualified buyer up to 100% financing. And if the practice is in, let's say, a house or a commercial condo that's owned by the vendor, they will provide 100% financing on that too. So really the key is the buyer creditworthy? And I mean, to define creditworthy, a lot of the times the bank is relying on that person's personal credit bureau because how you pay your bills will indicate how you'll pay the bank back. Obviously, it has to make sense. I mean, if you've got someone that's a couple of years out of school with a really sizable loan from student loans and all of that, maybe purchasing a $3 million optometry office might not be the right fit financially.
Right.
My concern is never about the money. It's about, do you have the ability to run a business of this size? Because it's multi-doctors, probably 15 staff. Like it's a pretty big business, right? So what's your experience? But that same person would qualify for a practice that's maybe 500,000 because it's more manageable, right?
So let's say I'm getting ready to sell, right? What's your advice for a prospective seller? Like, how do we make our practice look more attractive?
So there's a couple of things. And that I go back to my comment earlier where I said the best time to get your practice ready for sale is 3 to 5 years. If that's an ideal scenario, by doing the full appraisal, we will identify things that you specifically need to do to not only raise the value, but make it more attractive to a buyer. Sometimes you're not in that situation. You might suddenly decide today, that's it. I've had it. Cannot do this anymore.
I do that every day.
I want to sell and be out. I want to be out by June 30th. So we don't have that luxury. So in that case, what we're looking at is have your financial information up to date. If your office is cluttered and your private office is a disaster, maybe clean it up. But here's the funny thing. We had a doctor who said, I can't clean my private office up because it's been like this for 20 years. If I come in and it's clean, my staff is going to know what it looks like. And they're going to know there's something going on. So what we had to do in that case, which is hilarious, is we had to clean it for the open. But then when we left, we had to mess it all up again so that nobody knew anything. And I want to make a quick point to deviate for a moment. We're not intentionally trying to hide anything from staff. The reason, and this is what makes selling very tough for an owner, because you've been with these folks maybe 10, 20 years, and you're a family. And you feel the hardest thing for a vendor is really that period of time until they can tell staff, I've sold the practice. Because they're just walking around feeling like they're hiding something, that they're lying. But it's really important you do that because, as I said before, you don't want to create uncertainty for the new buyer. And for them, you don't want them to feel like, is my job at risk? Am I going to be able to find another job? I'm very happy here. I love all the patients. I don't want to leave. Because all the buyers that we've ever worked with, they don't want the staff to leave.
Of course.
Because they realize their value in the whole operation. So this is just taking stress off of the staff, which will take stress off of you because the last thing you want to be doing is having a weekly conversation about, so has the clinic sold? What do you think the new owner is going to be like? Like it's just,
Right.
It just takes away from what you do best, which is treating patients.
And as you said before, you don't want your staff sort of preemptively bailing in anticipation of change.
Exactly.
Right. So any advice you could offer for prospective buyers?
I would say sign up for our new listing service. As I said, it's an educational tool because you'll see what the market looks like, what the values are, what different practices have in terms of metrics. I would say go to any seminar that you can that is business oriented, even if it's not necessarily for optometrists specifically. The principles are still similar. Focus on communication skills because speaking to patients, as you know, is really critical, but also being able to communicate your goals, your intentions to staff is also very important as well. I would say those are understanding numbers, understanding financials. You don't need to be an accountant, but you should at least understand how your expenses relate to what you're producing. Those are the key things. And I think the most important thing I always tell any business owner, whether you're about to exit, you're in the middle of it, or you're about to take it on, don't try to do everything by yourself.
For sure.
Because oftentimes you won't do anything well. And really, again, what is your best focus on? Being an optometrist. That's what you do best. That's what you went to school for. That's your expertise. Leave this other business stuff to other people.
Yeah. In the same way that we suggest patients come to us for eye care because that's what we're good at. Yeah. At some point, you have to admit that there's other people that know things about other things that you should tap into to get some expertise for sure. And I find for me, as I get older, that's something I learn more and more and more. Like I'm still really smart.
I know.
Let's put that out there.
You know what? I know you're really smart. In fact, I think I saw something about how smart you were. So yeah, you're like famous for being smart.
Jeez. I was fourth on the list for the Jeopardy greatest of all time. They only went with the top three, but I was number 4.
Oh my God. See, I would totally freeze on that if that was me.
No kidding, eh? So let's say we are practice owner. We're thinking of selling or at least seeing where we're at. What are the steps if someone were to get in touch with you and say, I want to start the process?
So we'd have a conversation. Either we like to do things face to face, but sometimes that's not always the case. So we will have a good conversation with you to make sure that it is the right time for you. What's your motivation? What information do we need? We'll give you a nice list. And then we start the appraisal process. And the thing that's really critical is it's always important from a psychological standpoint, make sure you're selling for the right reasons. Because sometimes if you're tired and you're frustrated and you're just selling for that, well, maybe that is a time to sell, but maybe there's some other things that we need to tweak a little bit and let you hang on to the practice for a little bit longer. Ultimately, what our goal is just to make sure that we hear you, we understand what your goals and your needs are, and then we bring a buyer to you that's going to meet those requirements.
And I would definitely suggest people check out the website with the listings, and we'll put a link in the podcast page, because it is eye-opening to see A, what's available, and B, like you said, to get an idea of the metrics that are involved and how that influences the appraisal price.
And really, it's a good exercise to do, because you will see our dental listings, you'll see our vet, and you'll see our optometry. Right now, I mean, dental is constant. It's not a seasonal type of business. Veterinary is a bit more seasonal, because when they're in their busy season, nobody's thinking about buying or selling because they're just too busy.
Right.
Optometry, you will see, I'm going to be perfectly honest, you won't see very many listings, because we still are in that mode, right, where we're doing lots and lots of appraisals, but they're for people that already have a private buyer or an associate ready to get in there. But it doesn't mean that if you, as an owner, call us up, that we certainly can't share specific market information. We can't reveal specific confidential information, but we can tell you what this would look like if you chose to go to the open market versus selling privately.
Yeah. And again, it's often that, what gets measured gets improved on, and sort of knowing where you stand certainly gives you some targets moving forward, right?
I think the toughest thing sometimes for owners is, why do I need to pay a broker? Why do I have to pay any commission? I can just save that. And I think until people go through it, they don't really realize how much is involved. And I can tell you from experience, a very average deal transaction takes about 300 hours from the time we start with the listing to the time we close the deal. And that's an average transaction. Sometimes it takes 2 or 3 people to get the deal finished. The first buyer might come in and it might be the right fit, and then for some reason it doesn't work out, so we move on to the next buyer. So it's a process. And if you're running your office and you're seeing patients, do you have an extra 300 hours to spare? And if you do, then with all due respect, you should be seeing more patients or doing something for yourself, like enjoying your family. Because when a buyer asks questions, which they should, it's like you opening the kimono and letting everybody look at every lump and bump you have. Right? That's not a good feeling. But as a broker, we can have those conversations on your behalf. You would never know that someone's been poking holes and saying, well, I don't like this, I don't like that, because it is what it is.
I can't get that image out of my mind now, but all right. Yeah.
You're having a visual right now.
I'm not sure that was good, but
I'm all about the shock factor.
On that note, then, thank you very much for participating in this podcast and leaving us with that excellent image of me in my open kimono.
Well, I don't think people will forget me.
True. Well, and, the nice thing for me is I can probably afford to retire when I'm about 80. So I got a lot of years to go to the gym and improve my kimono-less look.
There you go.
So from that perspective, I'm good. And so we'll sort of go from there. But I just want to thank you very much.
Well, thank you for the opportunity. I really enjoyed it. And I think the market is just so optimistic for optometrists. I'm excited for the profession.
Awesome. And we will post links to your website on the podcast page. And I really suggest everybody check it out. It is very enlightening and very eye-opening. So thanks again, Jackie. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Glenn. Have a great day.
Thanks, you too. Bye. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Eyes Wide Open. Please visit our page at eyecarebusiness.ca for more information and links to today's topics and guests. If you're looking for an online optometric community, send an email to canadianoptometrygroup@gmail.com to join the Canadian Optometry Group. You'll get access to a vibrant online community for Canadian optometrists. Thanks to our sponsor, Canadian Eye Care Business Review. Remember to visit them at eyecarebusiness.ca to stay up to date with the latest eye care news and lots of great resources and articles on topics like practice management, marketing, products, team and leadership, and finances and operations. And we'll see you next time for our next episode of Eyes Wide Open.